Hey everybody! So this video is going to be a quick video over the functions of self-esteem. So first we're going to define what self-esteem is, then we're going to review two of the functions that have been proposed for self-esteem over the past 20 to 30 years. So I'm going to share the screen right quick. Alright, so first, what is self-esteem? Well, self-esteem is basically an evaluation of us. So we evaluate ourselves. Do we like ourselves? Are we worthwhile? Do we have, do we have positive attributes, or do we not like ourselves? Or do we feel worthless, or do we think that we don't have positive qualities? Now, what are the functions of self-esteem? Well, over time, there have been several functions proposed. One proposed function is that self-esteem helps us to manage our fear of the fact that we are eventually going to die. And that function was proposed by terror management theory. And we're going to cover that in a little bit. And then the second, or at least the second most popular theory that's proposed for why we have self-esteem, or the function of self-esteem, is that self-esteem helps us to manage our connection with others. It gives us information about our connection with others that we can then use to pay more attention to others or not. So let's talk about each separately. So terror management theory argues that self-esteem serves as a buffer against our fear of ultimately dying. So according to terror management theory, humans are unique in that we can think ahead by quite a bit, and we all recognize the fact that we are eventually going to die. And this is scary, all right? The fact that we're going to, this life will be over, is scary. And so according to terror management theory, self-esteem helps us to buffer that fear. So people with high self-esteem are less afraid of it than those with low self-esteem. And so according to terror management theory, what we do when we're made aware of our death, when our mortality is made salient, is we try to reduce that fear. And we try to reduce that fear in a number of ways. One way of reducing that fear is by endorsing worldviews. So, if you make a person's mortality salient, and one of the most common ways for doing this is basically asking people what they think the experience of dying is going to be like. The physical sensations, etc. And what often happens is that when you compare people who have been made to think about their own death compared to people who haven't been made to think about their own death, people who've been made to think about their own death tend to endorse their own worldviews to a greater extent than those who weren't made to think of their own death. So among those whose mortality was made salient, they tend to report being more committed to their religion, more committed to their social groups like their political party. Doctorates like me tend to report a greater desire to publish. All right. So basically, this endorsing worldviews and even the desire among doctorates like me to publish when their mortality is made salient is all, according to terror management theory, in an effort to symbolically extend our life beyond death. All right, so we try to make ourselves believe that we're going to continue on, and certainly there is an emotional comfort that comes from the idea that we live on after death. Well, terror management theory says that self-esteem serves as a buffer. So among people with high self-esteem, you see less of that in worldview endorsing effect. So when just on average, people who are made to think about their mortality, they endorse their worldviews more than people who don't think about their mortality. But among people with high self-esteem, those who think about their mortality think more. They endorse their worldviews more, but not as much more than those who don't. than those with low self-esteem. So, if I was to really quickly draw you a graph, you probably can't see that. Bear with me a second. Sorry. I'm still here. There we go. Let me unshare that so you can see that a little bit better. All right. So, if I just quickly threw this together, but if we're, measuring the extent to which they endorse their worldview, if we look among the high self-esteem folks, those who were made to think about their mortality endorse their worldview more than those in the control condition. But the difference between these two conditions is not as high. I almost flipped you off there. Sorry about that. It's not as great as the difference for those with low self-esteem. All right. Again, those with high self-esteem, this difference is not as great as it is among those with low self-esteem. All right. So self-esteem kind of works as a buffer. It buffers against that fear of your ultimate death, making that fear less of something to worry yourself about. Now, we've just covered term management theory, but that's only one. In recent years, it's kind of been, and I imagine there's a lot of term management theorists that would argue with me about this, but I've seen more written about sociometer theory than I have about terror management theory. So sociometer theory argues that self-esteem acts as a gauge of how connected we are with others. So self-esteem would argue that those who have low self-esteem don't feel like they're properly connected to other people, but those with high self-esteem feel like they have strong connections with others. In fact, when we see people's self-esteem take a hit, so they're made fun of or they're rejected, we tend to see them try to re-establish connections with others. Whereas when people, more so than people who have high self-esteem. Now, why is it? Why is it that, why would we need a gauge of how connected we are with others? Well, contrary to a very, or a somewhat popular belief, individual humans are not very successful at surviving without the benefits that a group provides. I mean, I know there are TV shows that are popular about, the person surviving in the wild all on your own. If you have tools and weapons, you can get by. If you have guns, you can get by. But the chances of surviving without a group are fairly slim, and they have always been for humans. Humans aren't terribly effective as individuals, but we are awesome at groups. And when we're in our groups, there's not a whole lot that we can't tackle. So because groups have been so important to our survival, sociometer theory argues that over the course of our history, we developed this self-esteem to help us gauge whether or not we were connected to others, whether or not we were sufficiently in a group. And when we have low self-esteem, that indicates, oh, something's wrong. We might get kicked out of our group. We need to do things to fix our relationships with our groups. So sociometer theory basically argues that self-esteem is a gauge, whereas terror management theory argues that self-esteem is a buffer. All right. Now, one final thing I will mention, in case you wanted to go look these up, read more about them, because they're both, sociometer theory is one of my favorite theories. If you want to go read more about them, Leary, L-E-A-R-Y, there may be an H in there. Hold on, let me check for you. Yeah, Leary. All right. Leary is the person who came up with the sociometer hypothesis, and I believe Greenwald is the one who came up with term management theory. I'm going to double check that too. Greenberg, that's right, Greenberg. All right. So if you want to go read about it, read more about terror management theory, just go to Google Scholar, type in Greenberg terror management theory. If you want to learn more about sociometer hypothesis, go to Google Scholar and type in sociometer, spelled like that, Leary. All right. And you can find all sorts of articles written by those two scientists about each of those theories. And if you're at all interested in self-esteem, which a lot of my research is about the self, I tend to be interested in those things. So you might check those out. All right, guys, if you have any questions, send them my way. Other than that, that's it for this discussion of the functions of self-esteem.